what people typically like is they like to go out there and they like to find a carbon copy of their industry and their market of what they've done. And I implore you to go and do that, because if you can do it and you get the A player, you're in business. The challenge for a lot of people is why would that person come and work for your firm?
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
Carl J. Cox here, host of the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Today, I am very excited to introduce our guest, Alex Rawlings. He's a founder of Raw Selection, partnering with private equity firms to secure exceptionally talented professionals for the PE firms and portfolio companies. And he's also the podcast host for the Private Equity Podcast. Alex, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Pleasure all mine. Thank you very much for having me on, Carl.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to flip this around. I've had the opportunity to be on your podcast, which was super exciting. I was actually saying how much positive feedback we had received when we've been on your show. I think it's also a testament to how in tune your guests are, and specifically in the PE world. So, Alex, what is the number one challenge when hiring executives for a private equity firm?
I think there's a lot of challenges for them, but it evidently comes down to whether it's a private equity firm, whether it's a publicly listed business, privately owned company, and it's all about whether or not you've got the best person, the right person. You know, there's some leading private equity firms as a stat. There's a very large private equity firm which claims to be one of the oldest private equity firms in the world, although that's up for dispute, that has a 27% retention rate of all C-suite appointments in their first 12 months. So that is horrendous. 1 in 4 executives, they lose. And this is particularly common in private equity, but also across all worlds and all spaces. So if the private equity boys with all their cash or perceived cash are getting it wrong, then chances are the hope for the rest of us is also fairly slim.
Well, it's interesting, Alex, for me, as I work with portfolio companies as well, helping out operators and helping out the private equity firm to turn around a portfolio company that's having a challenge. A little bit of the playbook is exactly that. I'd say for one of the reasons they buy a company that didn't have any outside help in many cases. And if you may, it was maybe unprofessionalized, right? A lot of opportunity for improvement. And they wanted to sell to get their money out. And they didn't understand what it's going to take to get to the next level, right? I think there's often a complete gap of that, I'm going to hang around for this next go. And often there just is not a clear understanding that when you get an investment from somebody else, they're expecting to get paid back too, multiple times from what they put in. And I think that just missed, right? I think it literally is missed by so many existing management groups. And so I think part of the playbook is we are going to bring a new team because we don't believe you have the capacity or ability to get it to the next level. So maybe I'm going to ask an inverse question. Why is a quarter of them making it work? Are you familiar with that? Like how do a quarter of them survive that really scary transition, right? Of being with a company and they actually make it through to the next exit.
So yeah, success leaves clues. There's an element where they just get it right. Google spent millions of dollars on improving their interview process. They dropped things like, if you heard of Google and you looked at it and they were like, how many elephants can you fit in a Mini? And why are grates and fire, or whatever they call it, the ground thing with the thing for lifting up to get in the sewers, why are they round, et cetera, et cetera. And they came up with all these different questions and they realized that none of them were of any value and that they'd been doing it for quite some time. And then they went to competency-based questions. So there's multiple reasons why businesses get it right, but fundamentally it's a whole process and it's working out where your process is. Most people start by, it's a bit like when you want to grow a business. You begin by identifying, how do we win more business? When actually, if you just stopped losing the current business that you have, you would not have as much need for business development. And everyone knows that winning new business is harder than retaining existing clients. So what people tend to do in their interview process is they tend to go, we need to assess as many profiles as we possibly can. They will then either increase their profiles of candidates and then realize that they can't really assess them effectively and then whittle it down to the ones that look good on paper, or they will begin, and the good ones, if we look at the book that's sat behind you on Good to Great, in my opinion, the great ones begin by looking at their interview process now and then begin to build on that interview process. So this isn't a big plug for go use executive search firms, do X, Y, and Z. Before you even begin any of that process, begin by looking at your process of how you select and how you interview people. Because if it's gut feeling, if it's what I call halo effect, which is where the person supports the same football club as you and you end up being pals, or you went to the same school, or somebody recommended them that you have a high esteem on, whatever it is, it comes down to it. It's about building out a strong process so that you can identify the good from the bad and therefore reduce your 27% for that private equity firm. You know, Google's is 50-50. It's still a flip of a coin, but it's about reducing that level. You know, even if you got it to 50 and 50, it's significant from a 1 in 4 to halving that to 1 in 2, and then being able to reduce that. And that's something we've worked on internally as an organization significantly to get that to that level, because recruitment is particularly poor at a retention of people in their market, in their industry, and that's something that we've put a huge amount of investment in. You can usually tell the firms that have the better your interview process, usually the harder it is that you've found talent and the more mistakes you've made because you've made improvements. Those that have found it quote unquote easier typically have a worse interview process or more of a feeling. So my advice is to begin there and then begin to run obviously how you work your flow and increasing your applications.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into this, because I don't think a lot of people understand what a deep level interview process is. And secondly, I want to know, I think that's super fascinating, because I've heard of many of the studies with Google that they still are a coin flip, right? You know, ultimately of that 50%, is that like only stay within a year?
That's on their hiring process. So they're basically, whether the person's going to be a good hire or a bad hire, when they get it down to the bottom end, they might as well flip a coin. And that's what they got it to. And that came from Laz Bockler. I can't remember the VP of HR's name that was in there, but very famous, Laz Boxler or something. I can't remember. But he wrote the book Google Works, I think, or something like that. Or that really good book. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Okay, perfect. So that's pretty fascinating. It kind of can be discouraging, right? That here we know Google has said hundreds, millions, billions, right? That they can invest into making sure that they get the best people. And how do people think that they can compete with that, right? From an internal perspective, when somebody else is spending so much money to do it, they think to be the best in the world at it. So let's go into some like basic fundamentals. And I know you're doing a bunch of research and you're working on a big project right now internally to be able to share with the world, or maybe just give away. You're mentioning here pre the podcast. But when you've dissected it, if you were to phase out, what are the specific things, A, B, C, D, if you may, that you need to have in a good, effective selection process internally?
So the first thing that I would say is that you need rules around what you're actually doing. Now, and that isn't, okay, how do we create like 1,000 rules? There's 3 rules that I recommend that every firm operates at, and then there's always a 4th because there's a bonus that we run with. But if you follow the 3 rules, it's all good. So the first one is set a high bar for people quality, and I'll talk to you about why, obviously the obvious importance of that, but how to run with that. The second one is assessing candidates objectively, and the third one is giving candidates a reason to join. And then number 4, which is obviously the bonus, power of 3 plus 1, is a maybe is always a no. And that's something that I've always gone back to, and that took me, I made it as a rule, and then it took me about 3 years to actually execute that rule because I was like, this person might be good. And I found an example of this. It's things like, on that basis, we've got a bad reference. It's a no, unless you know that reference is doing it to damage them and they're actually really good and the other references are in stellar. It's a no. Oh, this person's lied about this. It's a no for that person. And you have to become as strong with that. And it's hard because we're going to start with the selection process rather than the applicant attraction process, but you have to get that process right. So That's where I'd begin with. And then I would start to look at, before you do any hiring whatsoever, is that you sit down and you decide what you want. Now, this sounds really obvious. Well, Alex, we've got a problem in a business. We're missing a CFO. We're missing this. And that's fine. But the amount, like, I work with clients that are taking businesses from a 50 million in revenue to 150, 200 million. Some of these are going to a billion in revenue. And they're like, in 5 years. So they are super fast growth and super pace. And I'm not doing that with my business. I'd love to. Well, if I'd love to, I'd probably be doing it. But, I'm not capable. I'm not there yet. But certainly with our organization, if you look at what these guys are trying to do, they need the right people. And you need the right person, because it might not be 5 million to 10 million a year in 1 year, but it might be significant profit growth. It might be just literally give yourself a little bit of time. It might save you from a divorce because you're having to work 24/7. So the first thing you need to look at is what is that you need. Now, you'll hear quoted scorecard. Now, scorecards for me are incredibly important. There's multiple elements that you need to put into your scorecard. One of those is the current experience of your team that you're bringing this person into. So whatever it is, whether it's a manager, or it's a junior person coming into the business, whether it's a C-suite executive, it's the same process. Look around the people that surround them and begin to build out, what are those people's strengths? What are those people's weaknesses? This is a step that I don't see anybody doing at all. They just go, what experience do I need? Because then what happens is, once you've built that picture, so if you need a chief executive, you need to know what your CFO and what your COO have got. Because if they're missing key fundamentals, then you need to be able to build on that. Once you've got that data and you've built it out and you've thought about, what are their strike? Are they good are they gravitas? Will they help you to an exit? Are they really operational with the guys that are in the business? Are they too operational? Can they have do they have no gravitas? Can they not speak to people? What do you need? And you can run this up and down the scales, watered down for junior positions, obviously scaled up for the more senior as you go through it. You then start to build what I regard as the deal breakers and the deal makers. And then if you wish, you can have boosters on top of that. So these are without this, the person's a no. So maybes are a no. You're missing that, we're out. So if you create your unicorn that doesn't exist, you will never hire your person, right? But also don't water it down to the point where anybody or anyone can get in there. You've got a talent attraction problem, but we won't dive into that because I could be all day on that. But certainly when you are looking at your deal makers, what do they need? They need to have this amount of product experience, this amount of service experience, this amount of years in this role, this, et cetera, et cetera. You can then go into your boosters. So if they have X, they will also have Y. And then you've got to look at your culture and your skill deal makers. So these are your cultural values. If you haven't looked into what your culture's like, start by looking into it. If your culture is all centered, and usually if you're the founder of the business, take a look in the mirror. If all you care about is money, I can guarantee that all your team care about is money, because that's the culture that you've created. So look in yourself. What's the values? If you were to create values in the business, if you don't already have them, don't create new values. Create values that already exist, unless you want to change your business. So look at what the values you already have, mirror them on that, and then your deal breakers and your deal makers get built on your culture and your skill. So if you need somebody, if your business is typically very high urgency, very high paced, then you look for people that have those elements and you ask them around, why do you have X, Y, and Z? But first, let's just build out the scorecard. So you're going to build out those areas, and then your boosters will come final, which is, if they had this, this would be amazing. If we want to do an M&A, maybe in 10 years, we want this person to be here in 10 years. So if they got M&A, it'd be really nice, but it's not essential. If they've got this type of product experience, it'd be really nice, but it's not essential. If they've done cost accrual accounting at a really complex business, it would be nice, but it's not essential. So you build all those criteria. I could spend all day just on that piece, because if you can get that piece correct, the rest of it will begin to flow. And I'm sorry, there's a ton of work that goes into creating an exceptional interview process and running through it, but certainly building out that before you even kick off is absolutely critical.
There are so many different pieces I could comment on. One is I loved it how you talked about culture there for a moment. Culture is who you is, not who you are. Sorry, not who you is, but who you are, not what you think you're trying to be. And it's when you print it on a wall, people don't laugh because it's consistent, right? You know, with your. So that's number one. I love it how you talk about that. You go towards that. Going the second level of this is not easy when done well, meaning the hard work that you do up front to prepare, understanding skills, understanding culture, understanding the experience. You know, one of the things that's missing often with especially the small to mid-sized companies that are trying to grow, they typically don't have the internal training, right, to help bring somebody up on board. And so when we do think, oh, they're just going to grow with us, sometimes, right, sometimes they'll be able to. But if they don't have training from a big company in the past, you know, or at least good leaders from a smaller company that they had that kind of Fortune 500 experience, often you're not going to be there, right? You're going to be left behind. So, but then there's that other challenge too, right, Alex, is that sometimes somebody from, I'll just pick on GE just for the purpose of GE, you know, sometimes who works somebody at GE is going to be a failure at a small to mid-sized firm because they won't have the resources, right, that the big co's have. So question, when going into this and that detailed process, instead of just start throwing out a post and asking for people to hire, right, which I think it happens so often, or going to recruiter and saying, I just want to start hiring, and then they just become order takers, right? When you go through that process, that difficult process up front, does it help then with the application when they do come in? Is it I love it too. You have a yes, no, not a maybe. So only yeses that get through that filtering process. How long does that process take for you, you know, when working, if you got a new order that's filled, how long does that process typically take to come up with the structure or the scorecard up front?
So, I mean, what it typically takes for me, because I interviewed lots and lots of A, executives, and B, selections of private equity firms of what do they need, is it doesn't take me a great deal of time. It takes me like an hour's conversation with an exec. But the issue is that I do it all the time, and therefore I challenge the questions of what's come through. So if what people typically like is they like to go out there and they like to find a carbon copy of their industry and their market of what they've done. And I implore you to go and do that, because if you can do it and you get the A player, you're in business. The challenge for a lot of people is why would that person come and work for your firm? And then you start to go, well, you know, we're a really good business and we're really good. And I'm like, well, that's great, but why? Well, we're trying to grow. And I'm like, well, so is everyone else. You know, competitive landscape in private equity backed businesses, everyone's trying to grow. We offer equity. Everyone offers equity pretty much. So you've got to get that differentiator, and you've got to understand what that differentiator is. So if we come back, it's about asking yourself questions. It's about forming the foundations of what that position is going to look like. And I'd be spending, and I know this is horrible for me to say but I'd be spending 2 or 3 hours sat down and I'd be looking at it. And one of my other recommendations is to have a hiring committee. And because what we tend to do is if we're a small business, you know, sub 10, everybody interviews with them, which, okay, I get. If we're a, sub 100 business, there's 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 people that would jump in. And then the next process starts and then someone else is involved, right? And there's a new team that then gets involved. The problem with that being is there's no consistency with it. You know, the executive that was involved in the first process now doesn't have any say on what the second process looks like. Nobody learns from anything. Or if you do, it's by accident. So sit down for 2 to 3 hours, build out exactly what you're looking for, and really challenge the questions. Anything you put on that sheet, question yourself. The reason I say 2 to 3 hours is because it'll become a lot faster in the future ones. But do this for a critical hire that's really important for the business, and just spend that time. Have 2 or 3 of you in that room that will be involved in the interview process, build it out. And then at least one person from that process sits on every single interview process and is assigned as the interviewer. And that's fine if it's HR, and that is okay. If you are a small business, do not dump all of talent selection and attraction on a HR person whose job title is human resources and is not a recruiter and is not the person leading the search. Now, again, classic recruiter, let's bash HR. Let's not bash HR. They do a phenomenal job and have a phenomenal career track and have huge amounts of value to a business. But just go in, I want you to find this person and select it on them is very difficult for them to do when they don't do that job. You need somebody in, there's a line manager that's involved in the process, there's a senior manager that's involved in the holistic growth of the business to build out that. And I know I'm spending quite a bit of time just on one thing, but if you can just get that identification of what you need right, the rest of your search process becomes easy because you don't need to work out your culture every time you hire. You've already got your culture. You've already got it mapped. You already know the type of person you're looking for. And if you can therefore bring your testing process into that, whether it be personality profiling testing, and actually look for people that actually mirror your culture even better. But you bring in all these different bits and pieces, and then it builds your selection process. At the moment, our selection process is built on the fact that most companies do a first interview, most companies do a second interview, most companies do a final interview. And that's like, why do you do it that way? Well, that's why everybody does it. Well, okay, but do you do a test? Yeah, we do a Myers-Briggs test. And do you know what you're looking for? Yeah. What are you looking for? For them to come out good? What's good look like? Well, we don't know. What does your top performer in your business do? Don't know. What does everyone in your business do as a Myers-Briggs test? Well, I don't know. Well, how do you know what you're looking for if you don't know what you've got? So it's, again, and we use testing, but I use testing for my own firm. I don't recommend any clients a testing process unless it's theirs, because it's great that I can tell you that X, Y, and Z has achieved this. But if you can't benchmark that against anything, then it's useless information for you. And just because you're a good executive in one company doesn't make you a good executive in another. And that testing process doesn't give you the answers. Your scorecard gives you the answers, and your testing then confirms is the information that's on that we want on the scorecard coming up in this test, or does this fit the culture of the person we're looking for based upon our tests of every single person in this firm or every single person in management? They've all come up as this type of profile, right? Do we want to hire this type of profile, or do we want to hire a different type of profile? Or does this cultural assessment test tell us that they're way out, but we really like them, so we'll hire them anyway? What was the point in doing the test? You could say, yes, we've got awareness now. Well, the reason for firing them in 6 months is because they're not a cultural fit. So your scorecard is critical, and spending that time building that out. And then as a leader, if you're owner, founder, CEO, senior manager, you can then flood that down the business, and you can begin to say, here is confidence you can hire good people, because your managers rely on the fact that they are good hirers, but you never train them how to hire. You never train them how to interview. Yet you expect them to be good at it, and they put their worth on it. And when they hire somebody good, you congratulate them. And when they hire somebody bad, you think, are you that good of a manager? But then you also go, well, it's all right because it was the candidate's fault anyway. Well, you're pulling people out of jobs, putting them into your organization and letting them go. How ethical is that? Get your interview process as good as you can.
There are so many amazing nuggets that you pulled out of there, Alex. And I love it. I mean, I just love, once again, your passion. And just that last thing alone is, why do we expect somebody's going to know how to interview? One of the best things that ever happened to me is when I was getting recruited out of the University of Washington for accounting, and Deloitte and Touche sent me down to San Francisco, and I was a mock interviewee. So I was helping their teams to help interview people like me coming out to be recruits. And it was amazing. It totally opened my eyes up that, wow, this is a real process. This is a real thing you could train on and make people better at to get to exactly what you're trying to get, the right results, great quality people to come to your firm to help make a difference, right? And they taught me some things today that I still give out to people on a consistent basis, especially young people that are entering the workforce. Like, if you learn this one thing, you'll never not get an interview. Now, I'm going to leave that hanging in case anybody's interested, because there's a couple pieces there. But Alex, when you got this, let's go to the next set of questions here. Is you've got it figured out. You've got the scorecard. Now let's go to the next big piece, which is you don't feel like you're getting enough candidates. You've got it nailed down. You've got it figured out. You're a small and mid-sized business, but maybe perhaps nobody's heard you. And you know this too. Like, there's a lot of great companies that nobody's heard of, just because they're doing what they're doing, and it's small, but they're crushing it, right? They have a really high growth rate. They're looking for great people, but nobody on LinkedIn is going to know who they are. right? Or nobody's going to see him from a typical place. So how do you help feed that process to bring in more talent so you get a better applicant pool than you would have typically?
So, a bit of a $1 million question, really. The simple answer to everything is it's effort, and it's about putting in, again, surprise, surprise, systems and processes to get to that answer. There's a few things I'd suggest, if I just take one step back before you jump into this, is a little bit of infrastructure around your business. Now, I've just said don't dump everything on HR. Give HR or give talent attraction, if you're fortunate enough to have somebody in talent attraction or talent assessment or whatever you call it, internal talent person, give them a clear role and clear definition about what they have to do. Talent and HR sometimes get brushed with you're the assessment, and they're not. I would be giving them this tool of attraction. So I'm going to guess that there's nobody in here that's gone, I can't believe that recruiting firms exist. I've never heard of them, right? So we're going to move that away on the basis that if you want to go down that route, go down that route. I work in that space, so I highly recommend it, but I recommend you find somebody good, and that's a whole different podcast probably. But if we look at the steps we're going to look at, so we want to get as much exposure. Now, what I'd say is for those that have phenomenal sales processes, this is very much the same process. Work it like a sales process. If you were to, the first thing you want to identify is your potential channels of where your targets hang out. So if you're a manufacturing company, the old classic widgets, there's a lot of widget manufacturing companies in the world, I find. So if you're a manufacturing company based in Ohio and you want to hire an engineering manager to come into your business, you've got to think, where do engineering managers hang out? Now, I've seen some wacky stuff, and people have done stuff in bars and done stuff in clubs. Engineering managers hang around in clubs. But whatever it is, but you've got to think, where do these people potentially hang out? So you've got your usual advertising process. Maximize those. There is tons of free advertising processes that you can use, right? The US, even stuff like Craigslist and some of the basics. Sometimes you will be surprised. There is also paid advertising like your LinkedIn's, your resume libraries, as you call it in the US, and various different others. Utilize them as well, okay? Now, I would be putting... And a top tip here is you can actually purchase a year's license for advertising on LinkedIn, and you can change that job every day if you really wanted to. So if you're high volume shop and you're going to be hiring 12 people a year or something around that, so you can have a new job highlighted every month, then speak to LinkedIn and say, I don't want LinkedIn Recruiter, I just want the job advert license, and get one. Right? And then you'll have access, and it's one paid off, and you can change it as many times as you want, every day if you want, and do whatever. So that'd be a good idea. And using different advertising platforms. I've just mentioned a platform there called LinkedIn. You can go about and do active messaging and active research, find your talent pool, and then begin to outreach to them. And you'd be surprised what you can generate from that. You'll also be surprised of what you can generate from your own employees. I'm assuming if this isn't your first hire, and therefore it isn't just you, but your referral network is enormous. Put together something, $250, $50, $500, whatever it would be, if you think the value of that person would be, to bring in, and then tell your team that you are advertising and you want to fill this position. And if they recommend somebody to you, it doesn't matter whether they're good or bad, it's irrelevant. You just want the recommendations. If you put the pressure on your people to assess how good the people are that they bring to you, they will not bring you anybody because they feel it is a reflection of them. Whether they're good or not, you thank them for the introduction and you appreciate it and you treat them respectfully because these are referrals that they've had. But referrals from your own employees is a really good place to begin by building and generating that talent pool. There's all sorts of different bits that you can do. You can outsource a research function in India to go and find loads of people on which we have internally within the business that scrape all of LinkedIn, pull their email addresses, run email campaigns to attract them. But if you've got a really good talent person internally in your business, they should be advising you to some of these strategies. But I would say for everybody is, one, advertise the position, and two, speak to people within your organization. If this is sounding like a lot of work for you, go to option 10 and jump into a recruitment executive search firm, okay? But if you do have time or you've got the resources internally and you want to fill it, make sure you invest in those two strategies, I'd say, to begin with. But and there's a ton more that I can share, and happy to go through them. But I begin by those. Those are easy enough.
No, great suggestions. And I have somebody recently that one of my clients that used a LinkedIn, and they got 300 applicants, right? They actually did a great job of sourcing. One of the things that they gapped was they didn't necessarily have that filtering process. They didn't necessarily have that scorecard. So that's why I appreciate you going back. You start with that, right? Because you can, once again, you could bring in all the people in the world, but if you don't have a clear process, and then even taking a step further, for example, just the simple one, like in sales, like there's different assessments you could do to figure out what type of salespeople. Are you looking more for an account executive, or are you looking for a hunter, right? A hunter or farmer, is the more common distinction. Do that testing in that process, right? When you get down to final candidates, because you want to make sure you're bringing in the right type of candidate of what you're trying to look for, as opposed to, we're just bringing a salesperson. Well, anybody knows, been around salespeople for a long time, they're very different, based on what you're trying to get. And so understanding what their goals are, how much is inbound, outbound, et cetera, getting down to where that skill, the requirements, and then you're more likely going to have more success, on finding the right people. So I want to get into you asking questions of course, called the Measure Success Podcast. From your perspective, how do you now measure success in your business?
That's a great question. How do we measure success? I think businesses go through cycles. I think success is measured on different levels. If you're going through a growth cycle, it may be that you're pushing everything on revenue. We're just about to finish our hiring cycle for us, and we're about to go into a consolidation. So right now, I've got 2 open positions. No, I don't. I've just filled one. I've got 1 open position urgent open position within the business for quite a senior role. So success for me right now is having the foundations of our organization to go on our next scaling phase. We grew nicely last year. We grew very nicely the year before. And now it's about putting in those foundations to then scale. So we're on a journey. So success for us at the moment is on that journey to hit 10 million in revenue. But if you look at some of these top line figures and you look at what you're looking for and where your vision's at, I think if we look at the real long tail nature of what does success look like, I really want to create a firm that is exceptional and has incredibly high standards of operating. I won't say I want to be the firm that gets written about like the Toyota way, but I want to have something where people come in and go, do you know what? This is amazing. The level of service in your industry, which coming from the recruitment industry is very below average, so I shouldn't need to work too hard at creating that. But that's that for me, because that not only gives people pride in the work that they do, but it also means that there's success that comes. And then the second caveat to creating that level of exceptional is then to look at what are you creating for the people within your organization. Never mind your clients at this point, because they get exceptional, so they're happy as hell. But what are you creating for the people within your business that will have exceptional careers, huge career advancement, huge investment, huge development, that can come back and go, do you know what? Bloody hell, I'm glad I joined that business. I'm glad I was a part of that journey. And look at who I am now in comparison with where I was when I started. And I don't think enough people spend enough time thinking about the development that they've had in the course of a day, a year, a month, whatever. But probably and I'm a long way away from retire, thankfully, but probably when people look at that retirement, they think, God, what did I achieve? Whereas if we can start to think of that on a more monthly, quarterly, yearly type basis of where was I now? Where was I then? Where am I now? And creating really exceptional careers for people where people are really proud of what they do. And that certainly, I believe, will disrupt my industry significantly.
Love that. I love how you went through. I love how you have your long-term goal destination. You said to hit 8 figures. I love that. And so you have that longer term goal, but you have the goals along the way to help get towards that. You're talking about some of your journeys or strategies along the way to help make sure you're going to be able to scale. But then you went further and you're just like, this does come down to, if we aren't making a difference with these people, we haven't succeeded, right? We want to make sure we're really creating difference. And that's where your heart is, right? At the core of it. That's the fun part, right? It is amazing. I mean, it's so fun when we're able to bring in a new person to the right organization and they have success, right? And then they help, because it's not just success for them, it's success for everybody in the company that's working with them. And then you can even take it a step further if they're, depending on what their products and services are, perhaps they're making a significant difference for people around the world as well. And so it can be really rewarding, when you see that multiplier effect that happens. So I'm going to flip it over to the personal side here, Alex. You're a busy guy. You've got a fast growing business, you've got a great podcast. You're working on you said it beforehand, it's really early stages, but starting out early stages of working on a book. You're a busy human being. What type of things for you is, what type of habits are you consistently doing to help make sure that you bring it your best every day, every week, every month?
Right, I've got 1 year and 3 months old. So sleep is certainly a habit that I'm working on. And randomly, my smoke alarm went off at 3 o'clock this morning. Absolutely no reason. And it didn't wake him up, so we're all right. And then it went off again. It still didn't wake him up, so he was in his deep sleep. But I think one of the habits that I've realized is significantly is there's two things that need to be worked on significantly. For a CEO founder, in my opinion, one is you, and your business will only be as big, as good, as ugly, as great as you are. And I put up a recent post on LinkedIn, and that was recommendations for people. Where would you invest in yourself? What would you recommend? What would you go and see, and etc. And I've had some really good responses, so I appreciate everybody for doing that. But for me, this next sales, I always look at everything in kind of cycles of quarters or 6 months, and the remaining, 7 months of this year already. But the remaining 7 months of 2024 is about the investment in me, and how do I get myself as good as possible, and getting understanding of different processes and what I wish I knew when I started the business 7 years ago. And then point two is focused around the habits of investing in your team on a consistent basis. I believe that we do something incredibly unique here, where I deliver training for my team every single day. And I don't mean I send them to an online platform and they go, we have that, and they have to do that on a consistent basis of once or twice a week. But I actually sit with my team and I'll go through cycles. So I spent the first quarter of this year immersed with our sources and the people that solve the problem of candidate attraction and candidate generation for our clients. And we looked at improving our processes. We changed our steps we've had 15 steps for at least 3 years now. We've changed it to 16, and we've put a 0 in. So technically we've got 17, but we didn't want to go from too far. So we put a research phase into the research phase, ironically. So, and then right now I'm spending all my time with my senior associates in the business, who are looking at how do they engage with, understand pain, understand challenges, understand issues with their potential prospects, and how do they win business, how do they engage more future clients within private equity to be able to support them and give them, the gift, I would say, of working within our organization to secure exceptional talent. So that for me are the two habits I look at. One is improve yourself. Two is improve the people around you, because you can make yourself as great as you possibly can. And most people don't. Most people don't read the amount of books that are sat behind you. They haven't picked up your book or anyone else's. They just go, I'll learn by experience. And that's fine, but it will be slower than those who read and those who consume the experiences of others. And that, unfortunately, you will not drive into your organization. Patrick Bet-David, famous insurance investor, now runs Value Attainment. No link of mine, although I'd love to. But if you're out there and you want to reach out to me, Patrick, I'm here. But he encourages a book club, and he makes everybody read in his business. Now, for 99% of organizations, that never will work, and you will not have everybody reading books and going through. And as much as I wish we have a real reading book, but not everyone's reading the same book at the same time, because everyone's at different levels, and people are regressing on management, and some people are regressing on sales, some people are regressing on mindset and whatever else. So reading the same book I don't find valuable. But if that you can then teach your employees what you read and what you've consumed and the value that you've had, you put that into an online training program and you deliver that face-to-face, and you focus on what those people need in that particular area, in that particular division. That for me is incredibly important. And yes, I could hire an L&D person and bring them in and get them to drive that. But those two things, I believe, are the biggest habitual things that I follow up with every single day to make our business that exceptional for our people and for our clients.
Okay, one of our last questions here, Alex, is how do you now talked about a lot of the business elements behind it of driving great work. How are you now measuring success in your personal life?
I'd say happy wife, happy life, really. It's an interesting one because I'd have said none of that matters a year and 4 months ago before my son was born. And I'd have said, my career is everything and everything from there. And then your son turns up and they just melt your heart. For anybody who's got a kid, I'm sure you feel exactly the same way. I don't like the word balance. I don't like the word work life or anything around that area, because I think they intertwine and I don't think things are separate. And I think it's there. I think if you look at yourself and you just go, am I on the right journey? Am I doing the right things? Am I making mistakes along the way? Yes. But is my intentions great? Is my intentions to spend quality time with my son? Yes. Do I sometimes catch myself on an email? Yes. Right. Is my intention to sit there with my wife and have a dinner and then I end up on a call? My intentions is there. And you've got to sometimes pull yourself back and look at that. And I think it's just looking at how are you working both on your personal self, as in how you communicate better with your partner, how do you communicate better with your family, how do you spend more, less time, or whatever it is that you wanted to do with them. And providing that you can look back and go, yeah, I'm doing everything intentionally at this point, then that for me is where, right, what am I doing the work for? Yes, it's for a great life, but it's because it fuels my fire. And if I quit my job tomorrow or sold the business, my missus would kill me because I'm the most impetuous person to do nothing. I can't even watch TV. I get bored. So that for me is just, have I got that, my life and my environment right? So I don't separate personal and work. They're all one, and it's all a learning journey. And whether it's being a better father, being a better business leader, being a better husband, being a better family member, better brother, whatever, you've got to learn from this. And, Patrick Bet-David shares his content on being a father, and Jordan Peterson shares his content on being a good parent. So you've got to learn on that way. So providing them learning and finding them developing comes back to exactly the same thing, is am I becoming better? And am I learning and investing to be the best possible influence for my son, wife, whoever else in the future and currently?
Alex, has been great. I appreciate it. I think it's always fascinating when an entrepreneur then hits that next level. One's getting married, right? That's a big step. And then the next step is having children, and because it does change everything from your reflection, that all of a sudden you realize there's way more, right? Of another generation. That's, even though we care about our business, we love our business, but we realize that new child and your significant other is, it's like you said, if happy wife, happy life, right? If you're doing the right things and you're able to bringing joy at both home and at work, right? Things are moving in the right direction. And so good for you. Good for you. I'm excited for you and everything you've been doing. And I love it how you're still thinking about, how you can continue to grow. I think that is one of the most important things, is having that mindset of growth that you have, is that you haven't, even though you've done great job. And once again, your firm, just for those who don't know, serves most of its clients. Actually, a significant share is in the United States. And then they have their business as well in the UK and the world. And so, feel free to connect with them. But actually, we could take that next step. Alex, how can people connect and learn more about what you and your firm are doing?
Yeah, I'd say, look, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to reach out to me. My email address is on there. My mobile for the Europeans, my cell for our American cousins is on there. So just Alex Rawlings. There is a really famous individual who is multilinguistic, and I think he's got 7 or 8 different languages, or 11, I can't remember. That is unfortunately not me. I speak English, American, and Australian, and none of them is in the accents. So certainly, if you want to reach out to me, LinkedIn, Alex Rawlings, Raw Selection. We can work out why the name's Raw Selection, which sounds like dog food, but it's an executive search firm, and that's the best way to reach out to me. If you want to connect on anything, happy to discuss.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Measure Success podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on board.
Absolutely. To everyone else who's listening, the reason why we bring in great guests like this is because they have exceptional talent. They provide great wisdom, and I hope you can take some of this information. If not, follow directly up with them. And if you love this show, please go out and rate the podcast. That's how we continue to grow and make a difference out there for you. As we always like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.